Hello and welcome to this budget special on ET Now. Union Budget 2014 is perhaps the most eagerly awaited policy statement from any Indian government in recent times. There's a lot of hope riding on it, and when it comes to the tax regime, a cleanup act is desperately required. That's exactly what India Inc. as well as international investors are looking out for. And today on this special show called Cracking the Tax Code, we have a distinguished set of panelists from the world of tax. Dinesh Kanabar, Deputy CEO at KPMG, Porus Kaka, Senior Advocate, and Ketan Dalal, Joint Tax Leader at PwC. Gentlemen, thank you so much for taking out time and joining us on this special budget show. Let's start off with the million-dollar question, the retro tax hangover. How do you think Finance Minister Jaitley is going to deal with it? Mr. Kanabar, let's start off with your thoughts.
The retrospective amendment of Section 9, a la Vodafone, probably manifested the height of arrogance or whatever you would like to call it in the tax regime. There are two separate questions to what you say. First is, will the government reverse it? And second is, should it reverse it? And let me answer the second one first. I think if one has to send out a strong message to the global investors that really the new government is really looking at tax in a very, very different manner compared to how it has been looked thus far, it ought to take the retrospective amendment away. Whether it will do it or not, I really do not know. I wish it does, because I think it's a very important step, a very important milestone, a very important message coming from a strong government. The reason I say this is that very recently the government just appointed an arbitrator in Vodafone's case. So if there was a possibility of a retrospective amendment being taken away and sort of being made prospective, then why would one want to appoint an arbitrator? So one will have to wait and see.
That's an interesting point you're making over there, Mr. Kanabar, and here I would like to get Mr. Kaka in. Mr. Kanabar is speaking about the appointment of the arbitrator as far as the Vodafone tax case is concerned. Keeping that background in mind, do you think the chances are high or low as far as scrapping the retrospective tax law is concerned?
Well, I think again on this policy issue, I think they should approach it with two baskets. One is going forward, and going forward they can learn from countries across the world. UK has a protocol on not going retrospective except in certain circumstances. Brazil has a statutory provision on retrospectivity. So they can certainly send out a message that we have learned from our past mistakes and we are not going to do it again. And again, I don't want to get involved in the Vodafone, anti-Vodafone matter. I think retrospective is a policy issue which affects Indian citizens as much as it affects non-residents. And I think we should be clear that we don't want retrospective in our law, whether it's for India or for non-residents. Coming back to specifically on this, when they have to amend it, if they do go back, appointment of an arbitration is a process, I think, where there are certain time-bound provisions. So there is nothing which stops the government from going and removing the retrospective provision. The arbitration will automatically be infructuous.
Nothing which stops the government. Mr. Dalal, what do you think? Is it now or never for the Modi government to do away with this very unpopular tax policy?
One doesn't know whether they will actually do it or not do it. The other aspect that we must bear in mind that in Vodafone kind of cases, the party which is being held liable is actually not even the party which has made the gain. And that, to my mind, is one redeeming feature which they must consider. But I just want to make, one hopes that they will do it. In relation to the future also, some of the amendments on indirect transfer, even on a prospective basis, use of the word significant amount of assets in India itself, small shareholders at the top level, there are quite a few issues. So at least one hopes, and the expectation clearly is that at least that they will do.
Mr. Kaka, I think, wants to come
I would
here.
like to just say one thing. I don't think it's enough for a commerce minister or a law minister to say we don't want to go retrospective. It's useful. But I think now's the time, at least going forward, again, two baskets, going forward to put it either in the administrative part or put a board in place which will overlook that, or you put it in the statutory provisions. So there is a certain sanctity to that statement, more than just a statement from a minister.
The fact of the matter is, in every budget you have half a dozen or a dozen amendments where you are negating a high court, a tribunal ruling. So it has just almost become a situation that you succeed before a court of law and there is a clarificatory amendment. And there needs to be some sanctity to say this is not going to happen, number one. And to the point which Ketan made, which I think is quite critical, the way the provisions are worded today, they are really absurd. And what I cannot understand is that we have a Shom Committee report. I had taken this up before the earlier finance minister to say, you forget the retrospective part. There are so many issues on interpretation. For example, if an Indian company gives a dividend overseas and there is a distribution of dividend overseas, if the overseas company is held to be an Indian company, there's a dual layer of dividend distribution tax. Is that what you intend? The answer is no. Shom Committee has dealt with all of these issues. Having dealt with it, why can't we simply accept the Shom Committee report?
On one hand, you have tremendous international pressure from investors. Retro tax has almost been hanging very, very precariously, and there's a lot of hope that the BJP government will do away with it. On the other hand, you have the tax department officials who are forever under revenue constraints. They might have their own point of view that there are thousands of crores of revenue that can be potentially garnered from these retrospective cases, some of which are also under litigation. How do you think the FM will provide a sort of balancing ground, or do you think it will provide a balancing ground at all?
In fact, you're asking a very, very critical question. And this goes to the root of the tax policy. Can tax policy be driven by the ability to collect taxes, or what is a fair administration of law? And this is really where the new government needs to come out and say, we will not go by what has happened in the past. So whether it is the Vodafone matter or whether it is the Shell matter, where infusion of capital has been treated under transfer pricing, and most of us would really like to believe that this is an absolutely absurd approach to law. So can you simply say, because I am in a position to collect taxes, will I collect the taxes? And look at this. The way the Vodafone litigation went, there was no amendment. Vodafone went all the way to Supreme Court, won. Now the matter has been retrospectively amended. Till today, the government has not collected any revenue, but has lost credibility all over the world. And if you look at credibility of the government vis-a-vis a potential collection of taxes, what would stand important? Is it important for the government to send out a strong credibility signal and invite FDI in the or sort of go and chase that mirage of a couple of $1 billion?
Can I make
That's
a supplement to that?
Act. Sure.
What is happening today, international investors are extremely reluctant to invest. Tax cannot be the only reason. Tax is not the only reason. But it is an important reason, much more important than in many countries.
We have lots of other aspects to address, so I'll quickly like to take a dipstick survey. Will the FM make the retrospective tax law prospective or not? Mr. Kanabar, yes or no?
I do hope, wish, and I really strongly recommend and urge that the government does it.
Mr. Kaka, would you like to stick your neck out?
No,
yes
I would like a statutory provision, or at least an administrative board, to ensure that there are no possibilities that somebody else 2 years down the line decides that I will again have a retrospective situation. Yeah. We've gone through it in the past. In fact, I am a belief that Vodafone was a good thing in the long run for India. We woke up and looked at a terrible tax policy retrospective situation for the first time and said enough is enough.
Interesting point over there. Mr. Dalal, yes or no?
Again, no. It's very difficult to say yes or no. Hope, yes. Expectation, one doesn't know. I mean, it's very difficult to say what will actually happen.
General anti-avoidance rules. What do you think is the fate of GAR going to be? Is the BJP government likely to defer it? Is the budget even going to feature an announcement on GAR? What are the expectations on the ground? What are corporates looking out for?
Shom Committee came back to say that evolve a framework, familiarize your people on the ground, train them, and thereafter implement it. None of that has happened. None of that has at all happened. That's number one.
So do you think that because the current tax administration is not perhaps adequately well prepared to adopt GAR or to implement GAR, that they might seriously consider a further deferral?
I would want them to do so. So the other issue which is coming up is on transfer pricing. Nobody can say that Indian transfer pricing regime is any different from global transfer pricing regime. And no way can one say that the proposed GAR provisions are any different from what they are globally. It's a question of implementation. The way Indian transfer pricing provisions have been implemented, we are supposed to now have 70% of the global litigation in India.
Mr. Dalal, I'll come back to you on GAR, but I would like to get the lawyer in the discussion over here because he spoke about transfer pricing litigation. India clearly has a dubious distinction of perhaps having the largest number of transfer pricing cases. That's a very, very important area. The government has in fact made its intentions clear that it wants to reduce litigation. Do you think the FM will perhaps have some commentary regarding how to reduce transfer pricing litigation, because several MNCs have been involved in these cases in the recent past?
I think it's a question of the existing litigation, how to manage it. If you want, I think you should strengthen the APA and the safe harbor process, and I think that will itself reduce the litigation going forward.
Strengthen the APA regime. What do you think, Mr. Dalal?
You know, one of the things that is missing in some of our tax treaties is the ability to do what we call a bilateral APA. And both countries have to agree. That is normally Article 9 bracket 2 of the tax treaties. So, for example, India and Singapore doesn't have it. I think one of the important things they must do is to have that bilateral APA. The APA regime has started quite well. It is very well appreciated. I think the team at the APA...
Do you think the budget will address this in any manner?
The APA, there is a lot of backlog. So I just wish that the finance minister makes a statement that we are broad-basing the APA in terms of, it's not an amendment issue, it's an issue of bandwidth, it's an issue of number of cases. There are 5 APAs have been completed, which is very good within 1 year. But there are 400 which are pending. Some of them can be grouped into baskets. For example, BPO has over 100 of those cases, So I think it is very important to send the signal for quick closure. And I think the APA team is doing its best, but I think it needs to have more people and more bandwidth. Obviously, people with the right experience of the kind of issues and with a business mindset.
Broad basing the APA regime, I think that's something which all the guests on this panel are in consensus over.
Porus, you ask Porus a question as to litigation, and why would you just talk that in the context of transfer pricing? Really, there needs to be a mechanism to settle disputes, and that's one of the very strong recommendations which has gone to this government.
Do you think the DRP has worked?
The DRP has not worked, that everybody knows. Despite, even after the situation where DRP orders are become appealable, DRP has still not worked. I think that's a consensus on the subject. The question is, can there be a mechanism? Here, because of our inability to find a settlement mechanism, here settlement becomes sort of a dirty word.
And on that note, gentlemen, we'll have to slip into a quick break. Clearly, lots of expectations on the international tax front. And on the other side of cracking the tax code, we'll talk about the goods and services tax regime, we'll talk about the DTC and much more. Stay tuned to ET Now. Welcome back to Tracking the Tax Code. We have Mr. Ketan Dalal over here who wants to make a point as far as dispute resolution is concerned. Go ahead, Mr. Dalal.
Yeah, actually, there are 3 parts to dispute. If I were to broad base to say dispute management, and the Shum committee, Dinesh mentioned about FICCI having made a very good paper on dispute resolution. The Shum committee has made some excellent suggestions on dispute management in 3 baskets, dispute prevention. So, for example, come out on interpretive statements like the Australian tax office does. The second is dispute mitigation, reduce the quantum of disputes. And third is dispute resolution. So they have also come out with a recommendation that maybe we could have arbitration and conciliation and also strengthening the existing mechanism. So I just wanted to broad base that point and make the point regarding those alternative dispute resolution forums, and I wish the government considers that.
All right, quick thoughts, Mr. Kaka?
Well, I think there's one body that we currently have in our process, which is the Authority for Advance Ruling. It's the only body where you can obtain an advance ruling. It's practically in a state of collapse. There is no, frankly, final hearings except a few that have come in 3 years. The huge backlog. If you give strength to that body, it could be very useful for investors and non-residents.
Giving strength to the AR, that's a major point that Mr. Kaka is making.
And as well, and also there is a time limit of 6 months, but as Porus is saying, there is a significant backlog, and when you talk of advance ruling, there is an A. But the advance part of it is not happening because it's taking between 1 to 2 years to get a so-called advance ruling.
Strengthening the AR, that seems to be perhaps a big and important takeaway. Gentlemen, let's move on to the DTC. The Direct Taxes Code. Do you think it's on the back burner, Mr. Kanabar?
I've always maintained, and I've been on public forum on this several times over, to say that DTC is not really a tax reform at all. There are several parts of DTC which have been incorporated in the current Income Tax Act. Rewriting that law is not really going to take any reform at all. And while the last version of DTC was tabled before the cabinet, to my mind, it's not a process with this government should take forward at all. If at all there are issues which need to be addressed, whether it is CAFC or whatever is, they can be put in the current Income Tax Act. Is there a need for a simplification of Income Tax Act? Sometimes the word simplification becomes very fashionable. When you have a code which is understood, appreciated, maybe litigated upon, but positions agreed, that's a better way to go than try and do something and tinker with it, and then come out with a new set of regulations which are going to be then again interpreted and become a subject matter of litigation. To my mind, there is no need to go ahead with the DTC.
Mr. Dalal, what are your thoughts on this? Do you think there'll be any intention displayed by the BJP government, perhaps to take a relook at the DTC? Those are some of the whispers in the corridors.
I think the DTC originally came for the sake of simplification and of language and not for change in concept. I think if you were to have a new code, one must have a clear purpose and objective and a mandate as to what is one trying to achieve. the DTC came with one purpose. It has been mutilated beyond recognition for many years. In fact, I remember what Mr. Palkhiwala once said, that we should not confuse change with progress and amendment for improvement. You know, and just for making a change, I don't think we should go in for the DTC.
You spoke about mutilation, sir. Do you think Mr. Kaka, Mr. Jaitley will do something over the mutilation and perhaps take a relook at the DTC in its current form? Perhaps say something about it in the budget. What are your expectations?
I think the DTC should be buried. I think it will give a birth to a generation of litigation which we can't afford at this stage.
A very important landmark area of reform on the indirect tax front, that's the GST. And it's been stuck as far as sufficient consensus on the ground is concerned between the centre as well as the states. Your thoughts, Mr. Kanabar, let's start off with you. Is a mere GST roadmap sufficient, or there needs to be something more concrete that the FM needs to spell out in the budget?
So a lot had happened in the last 2 years. There was this broad agreement on the rates. So the middle rates, the preferred rates and the punitive rates had been by and large agreed to, with some sort of a dissension, but by and large agreed to. There was this agreement that the centre would recoup losses for a period of time with the states, and that period was anywhere between 3 to 5 years. So again, that broad consensus was reached. I think we had a political stalemate. There was a question about the federation and the fight between centre and state powers. And I think Congress was always backing GST. BJP is now in power. And I don't see any reason why in this budget there should not be really a roadmap being rolled out.
A phased rollout, perhaps? Some of the states which are ready get on board and the rest can follow later?
I would believe that if the Congress and the BJP states got on board with GST, there will be few other states left, and I think they will fall in place. The sheer ability to collect revenues, the sheer ability to monitor collection of taxes will actually, the way it happened in VAT, ultimately all states will come on board. I think it's something, it's an amendment, it's a change waiting to happen, and there will be a pronouncement hopefully in this budget which will give a roadmap. The IT backbone is also now more or less in place. So I think it's all ready to roll.
Mr. Kaka, the advantages of the GST regime are pretty obvious over here. It's all about creating the right kind of political consensus. Do you think the budget will have any big announcements when it comes to GST, or perhaps he'll just talk about the roadmap?
But GST is certainly the need of the hour. I think there's no doubt about it. There's consensus across both political parties that it's the need of the hour. And I think we probably crossed more than 75% of the negotiations, even between the federal and the states. So I think that additional push should come, and we should probably look that we should probably, at least by next year, we should have a kind of a GST in place. And I think that should be the time frame, because it will still need working out. I mean, any new law of this magnitude will take a few years to settle down. There's just no way that it's not going to happen. But I think you have to now, there's been enough discussions, and now it's the time to act with both the main parties in agreement.
Fair amount of consensus is what Mr. Kaka says has been reached. Mr. Dalal, conviction on GST timeline, how important is it for the FM to spell that out in this budget?
In fact, I think there is already a clear recognition. If you see even that 1 or 2 paras which come in the BJP manifesto, and there are 5 things written, one of them is the GST. So they clearly understand its importance, but equally it is difficult to implement. You know, a country like Malaysia took 7 years to implement GST. We are a much more complex country. But I think, as Dinesh and Porus both said, a lot of water has flown under the bridge. With assembly elections also coming up, the ability to get more states on board is very much possible. My sense is that there will be a roadmap indicated, and I think there will be a lot of action on that in the next 6-9 months, maybe a year.
Okay, clear-cut indication as far as GST rollout is concerned.
I would think so. I mean, they can't amend anything right now on the budget, I suppose, but I think
a strong signal at least when it comes to the GST rollout. Let's now move on to the personal tax area. And the BJP government was very gung-ho. It promised people that the good days are ahead. Do you expect, or do you in fact feel that the Modi government has the elbow room to perhaps provide any cheer on the personal income tax slab area?
There are a couple of things. First, we have a global economy which is not in the best of the shape. We have the Iraq crisis. We have
the monsoon issue.
The drought. And therefore, the elbow room is admittedly very little. There's a school of thought, and I'm just talking about a school of thought as opposed to my own view, which says that if you were to enhance considerably the exemption limit, then you are freeing up a number of SSEs from the tax. That in fact there is a study which has been done to say that when the tax exemption limit is increased, most people want to get into the tax set and actually declare a higher income. So again, that study very much exists out there. I don't think there is a room for a radical increase. I think there might be an increase announced in stages, something happening now, something happening next year. I would be very pleasantly surprised if the tax exemption limit goes from 2 lakhs to 3 lakhs this year. That itself would take a number of administrative SSEs out of the net, and that they could focus really on big ticket items. But I think the key issue which is going to come up, and I'm sure you will have a question on that, is there going to be an amnesty scheme? And
that's right. In fact, that was my last question on the show. What are your thoughts on that?
I don't know really. So I've just been watching over the last few weeks on how Switzerland has promised to give India all the names, etc. Mr. Jaitley saying we haven't received the names. Is that a harbinger for the shape of things to come, where somebody to come back and say we are now in the process of receiving all the names from Switzerland. Before all of that happens, do you want to come clean? We'll give you an amnesty. There are, of course, a variety of things to it. One is the Supreme Court commitment, which has been given several years back to say we will not.
Do you think there will be any incentive at all on the lines that you're talking about in the budget?
I really don't know. Again, there is a lot of rumor. And, you know, I must make this comment, Ashwin. Just go back last 10 years. Just before the budget, the number of rumors that exist and how much percentage of it actually fructifies in the budget is not even more than 10 or 20%.
Mr. Kaka, I would like to quickly get you in over here. Curbing black money has been one of the major electoral planks as far as the BJP government is concerned. We've seen a lot of movement as far as the Indo-Swiss facilitation is concerned with regards to unaccounted income. How important do you think is it for the FM to make a firm statement, use the budget as a plank and make the intentions clear? The BJP government wants to not only curb black money, but is also going to act to get the money back to India.
Well, I think, first of all, now with the SIT, this has been really taken out of the government's lap. And if hopefully the SIT works, I'm hopeful that this is an area that's really out of the executive control, and this will follow up with the CBI and all. I'm against amnesty schemes. I think we must be very clear. It only rewards those who have unaccounted money in the last 10 or 15 years. The last one we had in '96. There's a commitment to the Supreme Court that there won't be another one. And if you have an amnesty scheme, you can certainly not forgive tax, interest, and maybe penalty of a minimum amount. You can probably ignore prosecution, but certainly allowing people to bring in money sort of clean and clear with a minimum amount of tax sends out a completely wrong message to those who have paid their tax honestly all these last 15 years.
And perhaps then that may not fit in with the moral image that the BJP government wants to portray. Mr. Dalal, we're quickly running out of time. Your comments as far as the amnesty possibility is concerned.
I think I would agree with Porus if at all it is brought in, and it's really, as he said, there is a commitment to the Supreme Court that they want. At least a significant amount of tax should be levied. I'm not so sure about interest penalty, but it is a significant amount of tax should be levied, because otherwise it is like rewarding people who have not sort of paid the tax on what they should. But I think what is more important is the need for evolving a framework to prevent this going forward. Reduce it. You will never be able to prevent this. And one of the things that I want to just say is, it is not just the rate of tax. We have reasonable rates of tax, but I think the administrative hassles of getting into this also need to be streamlined, because at least for small taxpayers, that is an important thing. Although, of course, here we are talking of people at a much very, very different level. So I think if the overall ecosystem is such that you prevent these things being generated to the extent possible, to my mind, that is a situation where obviously prevention being better than cure kind of scenario.
Point taken, Mr. Dalal, and with that we have come to the end of the show.
I will just make one very quick comment.
Please go ahead, Mr. Kanabar. Closing thoughts very quickly.
I think we spoke about black money, and I think we are forgetting that there exists a significant amount of domestic black money.
And the parallel economy.
Correct. Yeah. And again, at FICCI, we actually reached out to the government, and we hope to come out with a paper over the next maybe 2 months, giving concrete recommendations on how to address that. Because we keep on talking about Switzerland, but the amount of parallel economy which is running here needs also to be reined in.
Fair point over there. Thank you so much, Mr. Kanabar, Mr. Porus Kaka, and Mr. Ketan Dalal for speaking to ET Now on this very special budget tax panel called Cracking the Tax Code. Lots of expectations from Finance Minister Arun Jaitley. Let's see what pans out. Stay tuned to ET Now.